everyone, I'm Soju, and welcome to another part of Block by Block, where today I'm going to be talking about walls. So I do want to mention that I'm going to be talking about walls on a smaller scale since that's what I tend to go for. But of course, I'll share some tips on what I do when the walls are a lot larger than what I usually go for. One of the first things that I want to cover is depth, and I want to point out this build in particular right behind me because I think this one's a really great example of what to do when I have a lot of depth in my build. So as you can see, the wall itself is one block offset from the pillars over here. So on a smaller scale, it just looks like this basically. And as you can see, stairs, fences, trapdoors, slabs are gonna be your best friend when trying to decorate stuff like this. So on this side, you can see that we don't have any windows, neither does the front side. But here at the back, you can see that I just added one single window over here. So over here, I have the same layout that I have over there. And I want to show you my thought process when it comes to like decorating this type of build, especially when you have an offset pillar and wall like this. So first of all, I like to separate my walls into smaller segments. This one I purposely made with a middle so I can do it right here. But as you can see over here, it doesn't have a middle block, it has this 2-block middle. So every single one is just 2 blocks apart. So here I like to add upside down stairs just to make an archway. When it comes to decorating, it's a lot of repetition. And once that's done, just to add a little bit more detail, I like to place trapdoors on either side just so we have a smoother transition between the block and the stair, because this is only a half a block space, but when we add the trapdoor, you can see it's divided in a lot smaller sections, so that creates a little bit of a more smooth transition in between the pillars and the archway. So right now it's looking pretty good, but as you can see, the bottom part, it's a lot more bare compared to the top part. One thing that I like to do is place fences or fence gates like this, and it just adds a little bit more detail. You can leave it like that, but honestly, when it comes to decorated walls, it's just trial and error. I like to place trapdoors, or you can place slabs, whichever one you like, or you can get rid of this entirely and just place a slab. And what I like about this one is that you can place stuff on top. So I can grab a flower pot, which is my go-to thing, and just place them over here, and now it's a little bit more decorated without having to overcomplicate it sometimes. So this part is now looking really good, but the pillars are looking quite bare. So what I like to do is, like how I did over there, is place barrels, but only when I'm using the stripped spruce logs like this. I like to place them right here in the middle facing up, and this makes the pillars a little bit more interesting without having to do that much of a change. Or if you're like me and sometimes you think barrels are way too expensive, even though trapdoors are equally as expensive, I like to place trapdoors in replacement of these, and this trick can work with any single type of wood block or any block that has a trapdoor variant. So this is what I would do in a scenario where I don't have windows like that. But what if I do want to add windows? So right here is the same layout that we started with over there. So for this section in particular, since it's a 5-block area, I like to do 2 windows like this, just to again separate the wall into smaller segments, and this will make it a lot easier for me to decorate. So now that I have 2 windows over here, I'm gonna place my windows like this. I can make it more interesting by adding some upside down spruce stairs like this. That adds a little bit more depth into the window. It makes this area a little bit more interesting without having to sacrifice any interior space. The only downside of the walls being offset from the pillars is the space on the inside. So this build in particular, from the outside, it looks huge. Basically, it feels like it will have so much space inside, but if you go inside, it's just a little tiny room where you can probably have 2 floors in this. I think it would be a little bit too cramped. So that's the only downside that I have come across in having my walls in this type of layout. But in the same way, having it be a little bit smaller kind of makes it a little bit more challenging, and I personally like that challenge. So I like to see how I would decorate it, even though it might be on the smaller side. But yeah, interiors are a whole different video, so I'll get to that later. But I did want to mention that it might be a little bit more of a challenge if you are using the technique where the wall is offset from the pillars. So back over here, we have our 2 windows, and right now it's not looking too bad, but it is looking a little bit bland on these sides of the corners right here. So what I like to do is just arch these a little bit like this and place some trapdoors underneath, and that adds a little bit more depth into it. Ideally, I would have another pillar that goes along on the top like we have over there. So that would mean I could get rid of this one right here, and to make it look a little bit more interesting, I can just add some fences going along, and that makes it look a lot better. And it's still the same technique of separating the wall into more spaces, but of course, instead of having an entire pillar, we just have a little small beam going across. But sometimes I do like to take advantage of having a single block like this open. So what I mean is not having like a trapdoor, a stair just in the way of the full block, just because I can place lanterns. And lanterns are my favorite thing in the world to light my builds up. You can see I use them in every single one of my builds. But yeah, instead of placing the fence, I like to take advantage of these blocks because it's kind of hard to come across when you're decorating. And as you can see over here, I don't have that block because every single space where I could place one, it's either covered by a stair or a trapdoor, and I just had nowhere to put them. So this is more part of the roof, but I resorted to getting rid of one of the trapdoors that I had placed, just so I can place another fence and hang the lantern on top of that. But of course, if I did have this gap right here, I would have placed the lantern right there. But the only reason that I didn't is because it looks weird. It makes a lot more sense to have this beam supported by this stair right here than just placing a lantern like this. In my opinion, I think it looks bare. Because weirdly enough, when building, you have to consider that gravity is a thing, even though it's not a thing in Minecraft. Because if I didn't have these two beams right here, this entire beam at the top will only be supported by these two pillars. And in real life, it would look like it's not a stable build. I do like to have transitions like this, or even this shelf over here is supported by these fences connecting to the beams, and then also this stair right here connecting to the beam over here. It just makes it look a lot more stable, because here at the front, if I were to get rid of these and then just place the shelf like this, it feels almost like it's floating. So by placing a fence right here and then connecting these with the stairs like I did before, it looks like it's part of the build itself instead of just something that's just placed on there. So same principle as this part that I said before. I like to place trapdoors right next to the stairs to make it look a little bit more transition and like it's actually built into the wall. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but finally over here, planters are such a great way of adding a lot more color into your build, because this entire setup is quite monotone. But just adding a few flowers like this and then maybe cover this up with trapdoors like this, it's a lot more interesting than just having the entire thing be brown. And I like to cover all sides of the planter like this. That's why I placed 3, because if I had a middle like this, you wouldn't be able to place on both sides. So just make sure that you have enough space, enough space to actually place the trapdoors if you are covering it all the way across. But also, if you don't really want to do that, you can just place it along the entire way and then place your trapdoors, and then you have a way bigger planter, but you can still just decorate it and it'll look pretty, in my opinion. So even if you don't have the entire space for it, you can just cover it all like this and no one would bat an eye at your build. So as another example, you can see this build right here behind me. So I recreated this one from an artist over on ArtStation. I'll put the reference here and their name. But as you can see, I had to kind of sacrifice part of the house over here, because originally you can see that it was 3 floors, and yet this house was a little bit shorter than this part of the house, so I had to sacrifice just because the scale is weird in Minecraft. But I think this one is a pretty good example of not using any windows. The only window that I have is this one here at the top, but the rest of the house, it's pretty empty. So down here at the foundation of the house, you can see that I used walls here in the corner and some stairs also here at the very bottom to add some dimension to the house, but still not changing it completely. So if you were to go in, you can see it's pretty flat, and this leaves like a pretty good space for you to live in, and yet the outside, it's super detailed and everything. But as you can see, I did divide this entire house into 3 segments over here, and then I have another 3 over here. If you're wondering how I came up with this, it's honestly just experimenting with shapes, and I usually go for stairs and trapdoors to like create different kinds of shapes. Like if I were to put it like this, I think this one looks a little bit more boring than having the archway the other way around. So I would just experiment with the types of shapes that I have. And since this one was a recreation of a build that already was decorated and everything, I didn't have to do much thinking, but I still had to adapt it to Minecraft. But once you figure it out, you can literally just copy paste it all the way around, and the entire thing just looks more unified and it works pretty well. So you don't have to think of something unique for every single side. You can just figure it out on only one, and then you can just reuse that same technique on the rest of the build. So my next point is flat walls, because what if you don't want to sacrifice the interior space of your build? Obviously you make a build like this that just has the pillar and the wall be on the same level like this. So usually I like to go for this type of wall more than I do with the offset one, just because I do value the inside of my build a lot. As you can see here, we have a lot more space even on the top side, which is a little bit more cramped, but we still have a lot of segmented space just because the wall is not offset, because if it were, the wall will start here, and that will only leave me with a 3-block space instead of a 5-block space like we have here. So with this type of wall, I'd like to add a lot of windows. I know I mentioned with the other one that you can't have like no windows at all, but with this type of wall, it's just almost a must-have. So as you can see on this build, I made a lot of windows just everywhere. Like just on this side we have 5, over here at the bottom we have another 2, which are pretty big, and then over here I have 3. Obviously it's not a must-have, but it is one of the easiest ways of adding a lot more interest into your wall without having to sacrifice like a lot. Even like in this little space, I added like a little tiny window. So I'll show you how I go through the thought process of building a wall that's flush to the pillar like this. So I'd like to start off by making the wall itself a little bit more interesting, because we don't have that added layer of depth. So first off, like I did here, I wanted to have a foundation for this build. So I got rid of the bottom layer of blocks and added a foundation like this, and that makes the wall a little bit more interesting. And of course I'm not going too crazy with the color scheme, because these two are pretty neutral colors, and then this one is the one that pops. But you know, not every house needs a foundation, so I'm gonna get rid of that and I'll show you what I do. So first off, of course, is a window. So I'm gonna add 2 windows right here. So first thing that I like to do is replace these bottom blocks with stairs. I usually like to go for upside down stairs like this, just so it looks like the window is supported, because the other way around just kind of looks like it's about to fall off. As you can see, like the pane is not fully on top of the stair part, so I like to have it the other way around. And then one thing I'm really guilty about doing is adding a window frame. So right here is pretty easy. You can see that we have a large space surrounding the windows just to make that frame. So I like to start off by placing some fences like this. I usually go for the same wood that matches my pillars, just so it's all cohesive. And again, I like to use trapdoors, stairs, slabs to make my builds a little bit more interesting. Actually, we can get rid of those, because I'm gonna do an archway like this, because we have quite a lot of space on here at the top. So I'm gonna make an archway like this, and maybe 2 slabs, and maybe I can go across with some trapdoors. Maybe I can place one here, and there we go. That added the depth that we really needed without having to sacrifice any of the interior space. So again, one of my default things is to make planters, so I can add one right here, and then I'm gonna cover that up like this. But sometimes I don't really mind having them stick like this. I can sometimes just ignore the fact that I can see the dirt right here, hence why I sometimes use moss instead, because I think that looks a little bit more pretty instead of having the dirt layer. Or if I'm really in that mood where it bothers me, I get rid of it completely and then cover it up with an upside down stair, just because I'm really picky with stuff like this. But there we go, that looks a lot more interesting than just having a flat window area. And of course you can add whichever flowers that you like this, but maybe you don't have that much space like I have right here. For example, this little window that I did, I had little to no space for this one. Let's make this a lot shorter like this, and I'll show you a window frame that I like to do a lot. So I like to start off with fence gates and then open them like this, and then simply place a trapdoor on top, so you're not sacrificing so much space with the entire window frame that we did previously. Sometimes I even like to go ahead and replace these with campfires, just because it looks a little bit more unique. And then turn those off, and then you have another type of windowsill. You can even do slabs, but I think they look too chunky sometimes, so I generally just go with trapdoors. Or maybe like, hey Soju, I hate having planters around. What do I do? So another thing that I like to do is just add random decoration as if the house is being lived on. Sometimes I like to place scaffolding like this and make it look like I'm using this entire space. So I like to place stuff like this, maybe turn that off. And if you're not weird and like to use flowers, I like to use flower pots like this and just decorate this area like this instead of having to make an entire window frame like this. So maybe you have a farm nearby and you're like, where do I store all my hay bales? Not in the chest, of course, on top of your windows like this. Maybe you can have some like this. And I like to place campfires along, so it looks like it's a little bit more messy. And some of my favorite tricks is to use moss and coarse dirt under stuff like this, just so it looks like it's being used. There's gonna be a lot of foot traffic, so I like to place coarse dirt and moss, especially coarse dirt, to make it look like it's a little bit more lived in. So that makes the entire wall a little bit more interesting without having to add to the wall itself. So I did this technique over here, I think over here, yeah, I added some barrels over here because this part didn't really have any windows itself. So I thought like, hey, how can I make it a little bit more interesting? I added a little planter and some barrels that I wouldn't use for storage. They're just fully decorative. But it does make this part of the build a little bit more interesting. And maybe you think the hay bale is a stupid idea. And another favorite of mine is just bushes, really. Like, it's not that complicated. So my favorite thing is using the azalea leaves and the flowering azalea leaves, and I just like to place these around the house like this, creating a little bit more of a natural bush, or those vines that like go up the house like this, maybe like this. And as always, once I'm happy with the shape, I like to go back and replace them with the flowering azaleas like this. And in between, I like to use the double tall flowers, so I like lilacs a lot, and place them in nooks behind the bush itself, and then go ahead and place some flowers on the outside. And my favorite thing right now is the little pink petals, and that makes it look a little bit more lively without having to have too much going on with the wall itself. So as you can see, I did that over here on this corner, but this wall in particular, I knew I wanted the bush to crawl up the wall itself and go and end up all the way up here. And I do that with a lot of my builds. It's like my go-through thing sometimes. But I have some bushes here at the top and then on the other side as well. And then even with this another portal over here, I have bushes going all the way around, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. And that brings me to the third and final point, which is texture, which at this point I think is just second nature. As you can see, I use blocks that have a similar shade to each other. In this case, it's really easy. It's just the stripped oak and the oak planks. But if I were to replace these back, as you can see, it looks so much more busy just because the plank texture itself is quite busy. So I use the stripped oak logs just to break up the texture from the planks, and that looks a lot better. And you can see this technique, I use it almost in every single one. It's a lot easier to just use the planks and the respective log like this. And some of these are pretty easy to get together, like normal sandstone, smooth sandstone, and the cut sandstone. These are pretty easy to get in one go, but as you can see here, I used birch because they do have quite a similar shade to give more roughness to the house itself without having to go crazy with the color scheme, especially this one because it's a desert build, and desert builds tend to be a lot more monotone. So as you can see here, even on the inside, you can tell that I broke up a lot of the smooth sandstone using the normal sandstone. And same thing over here. This one's a little bit more easy. It's the brick deep slate with the normal cobble deep slate. And you can see here, it's just mixed in a little bit. And that breaks up the texture a lot more. And you can also see it here in the floor. And I show that mostly on roofs, but I wanted to show you. This is an example of that same block palette that I used. This one was mainly the stripped oak, and then just mixed in a little bit of planks, and that goes all the way around like this. And also on the inside, it's mainly stone and just some cobblestone mixed in to break up the walls. And of course, you can see that from the outside on these sides. And if you're like me and forget what types of blocks are in the game, my advice is to go into creative mode and literally just scroll through the entire menu and see what matches. So I like to scroll around and place stuff that I think have a similar shade. So I think this one matches really well with cobble deep slate. But then placing it down, you can see the pale log. It's a lot more warm tone. So I'm gonna go through it again and try to find something that's a lot more cool toned. And of course, because deep slate has a lot of variants in itself, another deep slate is gonna match perfectly. But if I'm going for something more warm tone, maybe let's test out the basalt. No, that goes, see, this is what I mean. It just goes better with this type of block instead of this one. Oh, okay, so I found something. This is the dead coral, the dead brain coral, and you can see it matches a lot better with the pale oak instead of the deep slate. You can tell it's a lot warmer and lighter, but over here it kind of works really well. So over here I placed some of my favorite block combinations. So of course we have the brick and the granite, and then I sometimes use terracotta, not always, but when I do, I really like it. Of course, all the deep slate variants are gonna work so well together. This is the stripped warped log, prismarine and copper, and especially the copper and the prismarine go so well together. This one's acacia and just normal copper, and then this one's a bit more of a weird one, but it's stripped cherry log, exposed copper, and mud. So the way that I stumbled upon this, I was trying to make a pathway using cherry and mud, and when you look at them side by side, they look very far away, and so literally I just went around and tried to find stuff that like works. So I literally just went around creative mode and tried to find stuff that I thought would work, and I tried a bunch of other color combinations, but then finally I stumbled upon the copper variants over here, and I noticed that the copper, like if you squint and like look at it really far away, it kind of looks pink. Maybe I could try it out. And when I placed it in between, it was like a miracle because it just really connects both colors, and you won't even notice some of the green poking out, because if I stand over here, it just blends in together and it makes such a good gradient. But honestly, I would never even thought of this if it wasn't for creative mode and just me searching for color combinations to combine. So yeah, there's just so many blocks in Minecraft nowadays. I literally use the weirdest blocks and try to see what matches, even though some of these might be like a really weird combination. So yeah, my advice is just to go into creative mode and literally scroll through the entire menu and see what matches, because you'll probably find some color combinations, even though they might be weird, but you might find something that you really like. So that's all the advice I have for you today. I hope that some of these really help you when building your walls in your world. And it was really just me showing you through my thought process of how I build walls. So hopefully you're enjoying the series. I'm really enjoying making these. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next video.